Stirring the Cauldron is sponsored by McGovern Tour Design, creative custom tours featuring you as the tour leader. McGovern Tour Design creates itineraries that focus on your special interests.
To the moor and the Highland glen, from the fairy hills home of the Shee, to the veins of the Broad and the Fen. Someone go down to the holy trees of oak and ash and thorn, utter a charm in the verse of 3 till the summer king is born. The crane, the wolf, the bear and the boar no longer dwell upon these shores. You say the goddess and God have gone, but I tell you they live on, for in the cities and hills and in circles of stone, the voices of the old ways, the spirit of Albion is calling you home. Horses carved into the hills, walk to the hanging stones, bow to the might of Sir Nabbas's height, fill a piece in the ancestors' home. Someone go down to Wilmington where the giant guards the way, step into the other world, into the womb where centuries pass like a day. The crane, the wolf, the bear and the boar no longer dwell upon these shores. You say the goddess and God have gone, but I tell you they live on, for in the cities and hills and in circles of stone, the voices of the old ways, the spirit of Albion is calling you home.
Threefold laws you should, 3 times bad and 3 times good. These 8 words the read fulfill, and ye harm none, do what ye will.
to Stirring the Cauldron. Now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Hey, merry meet everybody, and welcome once again to Stirring the Cauldron here on the Para X Radio Network. Tonight we're going to be talking about spirits with author Judika Illes and her book, The Encyclopedia of Spirits, which is the ultimate guide to the magic of fairies, genies, demons, ghosts, gods, and goddesses. Independent scholar and has spent her life researching a broad spectrum of the magical arts, including astrology, mythology, the Kabbalah, Egyptian mysteries, and spiritual and healing traditions from all over the world. She's the author of several books on folklore, folkways, and mythology, including 4 encyclopedias, which I've got 3 of the 4. And the Encyclopedia of 5,000 Spells is a good hernia book. It's wonderful. I love it. Her other books include Pure Magic, Magic When You Need It, and The Wiser Guide to Field Witches. So, Judika, welcome back to Stirring the Cauldron.
Thank you for having me, Marla.
Oh, I just love the excuse to read your books and have you on. I mean, it's just one of those things. I like to torture myself and learn stuff, and it's actually amazing. And okay, so I've got to start out by saying that your books absolutely fascinate me because they always strike a chord in some way or another, and it's not always the most obvious way. Now, for example, I sat down with the Encyclopedia of Spirits expecting to brush up on the djinn and elves and dragons and the like, and like 2 pages in, I was absolutely delighted to find out that one of my favorite eclectic novelty songs, Desi Arnaz's Babalu, is a tribute to a very potent West African deity, Babalu Aye. And I'm like, wow, who knew?
Well,
I mean,
a lot of people, it's like one of these things where you watch something or you hear something, but different people understand it in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Because there were people who heard that and right away, understood the subtext. And other people, just assumed it was a girl. Because it's all what we bring to it also.
Well, exactly. I mean, I thought it was just, rhythm beating on the conga drum. I mean, and then when, I read...
But if once it makes perfect sense. If you go back and listen to it again, it's perfect.
I know.
It's so subtle and so discreet at the same time.
I know, and that's the beauty of your books, because there's all this kind of stuff in there that, it's like the V8 moment on steroids. You bang your head and go, wow, this is very, very cool. So this is why I'm so excited to keep buying your books and reading them and calling you up and saying, please, please, please come on my show, because there's so much to share, and I get really excited about it. So thank you.
Thank you. Never like the chipmunks. After you.
There you go, or the Three Stooges, but that's a whole other show. Now, okay, so spirits are around us all the time. And as you say, they permeate human culture in imagery, religion, or vocabulary, popular culture. Mm-hmm. And it's an amazing truth that every group of people, everywhere on Earth, has had some sort of spiritual interaction. So who or what are spirits is a general broad umbrella thing, because the word defines way more than just ghosts.
I use that word, and I get asked about this a lot, actually. I called it the Encyclopedia of Spirits because I wanted an equalizer word. I wanted a very egalitarian word, because if you call it the Book of Goddesses, Fairies, Djinn, you have set up a hierarchy. In the English language, you can't help it. Once you use a word like God, goddess, deity, they're at the top. And anything else, or Orisha, whatever other word you use, is just you end up with a kind of a pecking order. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to let the readers create their own hierarchies. I don't, it's an encyclopedia. So it's not Judika's book favorite spirits, or Judika's, what Judika thinks about spirits. Although you can't help that kind of seeps in. If you're good at reading between the lines, you can tell who I love and who I don't. But
yeah.
I wanted to leave it. I wanted to try to be neutral, to try to keep my opinions out of it. And so you have these interesting situations. For instance, these fairy queens from Ireland, they're considered fairy queens now, but were goddesses pre-Christianity. Some Celtic goddesses kind of evolved into saints. Others evolved into fairy queens. Others evolved into demons. Others evolved into, lesser fairies. It's a lot of that is subjective, and I didn't want to be the one to tell you, well, this is the most important one. My goal is to write something that when readers read the book, something will resonate with them. I try to write with enough detail that, I think my ideal job is to be a spiritual matchmaker.
Ooh, that would be really lovely. And that would be your first customer.
Oh, yeah. That's really what I love doing, people. And I do, I do readings for people, and they tell me their dreams and their favorite colors and their experiences, and I can hear it. I hear, having written these books, I hear the spirit. I know, I recognize the symbolism. So, but I'd like to create books where you can recognize that for yourself.
Mm-hmm. And I think, and it's like picking up a deck of tarot cards or whatever, or shopping for a wand. It will jump out at you. Things that are important will come to you. You don't have to look. You don't have to, shake your head or scratch your head.
It's that chord, right?
Mm-hmm. And in going through the book, as I'm flipping pages, because I'm not reading every word because it's a huge book. But, I would flip a couple of pages and be drawn to something, and then I'd read that, and then flip a couple more pages. So you say that spirits are generally invisible, but can make themselves selectively visible when they choose. But can everyone see spirits of some sort if we choose to summon them?
I don't know. That's a good question, because, I've seen ghosts all my life. Mm-hmm. It's not a big deal, and I know other people. I'm not unique. I know other people like that. I've seen them all my life, since childhood. And you just kind of get used to them. And then there are certainly many other people who have never had such experiences. And, there are people who, I have people who look at me and will tell me what spirits they see around me, the way other people see auras. So maybe we're not all the same. There is a movie. It's actually a BBC, I think, Christmas special. It's called The Stone Tape. I write about it in the Wiser Field Guide to the Paranormal, which I wrote, but under an alias. Stone tape theory derives from this movie, and it is a theory that certain materials, like stones, retain essentially memories of sort of time memories, and so certain ghosts are not actually, they're almost like recordings.
Like residual.
And so some ghosts are not, so some ghosts are just residuals replaying over and over. They're not actual interactive ghosts. But in the movie Stone Tape, there is a recording studio set up in this old building. And one of the characters sees and hears and experiences the ghosts. And another one only hears them. And another one sees or hears nothing, but accepts that the other people are seeing and hearing something. And so, maybe we don't all have the same experiences.
Yeah, I kind of agree. And, I'm just wondering if one of these spirits or sprites or elves or whatever just wants to make their presence known, how frustrated would they be if the person they were trying to be visible to couldn't see them? That's kind of where the question came from.
And I think the other issue is there are people who can't see them, and then there are people who see but refuse to believe in their own, what they've seen.
Right. Good point.
People who absolutely refuse to believe their own experiences.
Mm-hmm.
That all happened.
Yeah, there's always doubt somewhere. I mean, we're always second guessing ourselves. I mean, I think that's human nature.
Well, and it's good to be somewhat skeptical because you don't want to, fall for everything.
Yeah,
I
true.
mean, that makes you very vulnerable. So you need to have a certain amount of skepticism without denying your own experiences.
Right. That's where the trust your gut thing comes in.
Yeah.
So it's a fine line that we have to walk.
As a reader, and that's a high percentage of the readings I do, but people who have some sort of an experience, and often it's an experience they had quite a long, it's the classic, my car broke down at the, on the entrance ramp to a highway, and someone came to rescue me, but there were no footprints in the snow afterwards. One of these classic, was it an angel? Or they have these experiences, and it's not for me to say necessarily what it was, but they want to know, were they crazy? Because they're pretty, they got off the highway. They're pretty sure this is what happened to them, but having gone home and and been safe, now they're not sure. Maybe they hallucinated the whole thing. So they want someone to say that, and there's a lot of experiences like that. There are a lot of people walking around with stories like that, but we're afraid to share them because people might think you're crazy. So there's a lot of people who actually have a lot in common with a lot of other people, but they feel very isolated and alone, and and are not sure they're not crazy.
Yeah, it's just it's the weirdness there. In addition to them popping in and wanting us to see them, or whether we can or not, although they live among us, they also possess their own realms, which means they can journey back and forth between the two.
Yeah.
Other than the story of Thomas the Rhymer way back when, who jumped into the fairy realm, can we do the same thing, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, people do.
Mm-hmm.
People do. I mean, that sort of, there are a lot of, and the word shaman is a loaded word because then you get into all these academic arguments about who is a shaman, and do you have to be a Tungus tribe person to be a shaman, but that sort of shamanic, I mean, I can, I know other people who can, so it can be done. It's the thing with Thomas the Rhymer is there was that physical journey,
yes.
In which he was not in this world, and you hear there's a lot of stories like that. And if you go through Encyclopedia of Spirits, you'll see, I'm thinking of all the fairy stories, but also in Africa, in Central Africa, there are stories of Simbi, the snake spirit. People who just fall into his realm and disappear for a while, and then come back and are profoundly changed to become great healers, come back with lots and lots of wisdom and knowledge. So that concept is not isolated to one part of Earth. When you start seeing things that pop up fairly universally, then they're either common truths or they're really, really old. They're so old that people have brought them all over the world with them. And so, the soul journeying, being able to travel back and forth to realms, but leaving your body here is not uncommon.
Right.
That the transfer, where there's that physical transfer, is more rare, but you do hear about it. And there are a lot of people who identify the stories of alien abduction as being similar to stories of fairy abduction. And, that's an interesting, I mean, we're just maybe interpreting it differently or interpreting the beings differently, but that concept of being taken someplace and then returned in a changed way is I mean, I think the UFO phenomenon,
right?
It's very, very much in the same theme.
Yeah, it is. Now that you're explaining it that way, it makes a great deal of sense.
I didn't make it up. I mean,
Do you think?
I've read other people's theories of this, but that
Well, yeah,
the concept of but they come, they take you, you communicate telepathically. They want something, and in a lot of in fairy traditions, they tend to want, and not just in the Celtic areas. There are also, I'm thinking of some Central European Jewish fairy tales where the stories are, spirits take women either because people are perceived, often to be wet nurses and midwives, because human women are perceived as fertile and sturdy and have the ability to give even to beings that are different, like a different, essentially different species from our own.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're very much in demand, and of course, in Celtic stories as well, and a lot of Slavic stories, musicians are in danger. Really, really fine musicians, because they want you to come and play at their parties.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And often the stories end well at the end. It's like if you behave yourself and you're honorable and you're not afraid, and you might be afraid, but you still behave honorably. At the end, you're rewarded and returned home and are changed, are transformed, but in a positive way.
Uh-huh. Well, of course, you hear all about the negative ones. People come back, bonkers or something. But that just makes for good stories.
But the interesting thing is how many. And I have another book, and it's probably the encyclopedia you don't have, the Element Encyclopedia of Witchcraft. And I say that because the publisher stopped distributing in the United States in 2006, shortly after the book came out. So that's sort of my lost encyclopedia, at least in the U.S. But it has a large section on fairy tales. Mm-hmm. And I think that there is a lot of pre-Christian mythology, and there's a lot of shamanic instruction, really hedge witch kind of shamanic instruction, real basic, not necessarily the stuff that theologians would study, but the things that women passed on to other women. Mm-hmm. And if you read them, and you have to get good versions, because they're, you can pick any fairy tale and you'll find multiple versions of it, and whoever is the teller may have an agenda. Mm-hmm. But a lot of them are there's a lot of information in there, and a lot of information about spiritual interaction, how to do it, how to get in trouble, how to get through these things safely, how to, if you need something from the spirits, how to achieve your goals, and how to come through your adventures, your spiritual adventures, in a positive way. And a lot of them do end up positively. They're not necessarily the most famous fairy tales in 21st century America. In 21st century America, 20th century America, there's a lot of, witches eating children. But that's not, but there's this vast body of really women's wisdom, because fairy tales, before they were written down, were told in spinning cycles, spinning circles, by women to children. There would be boys in there also, but they were young boys, boys and girls and women, and they would tell these stories. So there's a lot of women's wisdom in those stories. There's a lot of goddesses hiding in those stories, but you have to read a good version, and you have to kind of know what you're listening for.
Right. Yeah.
Very much like Babalu, where two people can hear the same story, and one person can think it's just a suspenseful story, and the other person is taking notes on how do you communicate with Baba Yaga.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's talk a little bit about communicating and dealing with spirits. And again, broad spectrum, it's all different ones, but as with human beings, some spirits wield more power than others, but you warn that all spirits, even those that we deem to be harmless, should be treated with caution and respect. So even, the sweet little little brownies or something, that somebody will think, oh, good, I'll clean my house. Might just, turn on the gas and, blow up the house.
I even broaden that. I think everything that is alive, and actually everything that is alive or has been alive really needs to be treated with respect. And whether that is a brownie or a goddess or a puppy or, a person, everything needs to be treated with respect and maybe always a little bit of caution. The old saying about hurting the ones you love. That it's an important thing to always behave honorably. I learned how to read very young, and I read The Master and Margarita when I was very young, and it was a very influential book for me. And if you haven't read it, it's a great book. It's a Russian novel, and it is the inspiration for the Rolling Stones' "Sympathy for the Devil" among the inspirations. And you have to treat everyone with respect because you never know. You never know who will one day be in the position to either help you or harm you. So always, treat everything with respect.
Well, that's the thing, and I think people are under the misconception that certain things are very harmless. All right, so a fairy is a sweet little Tinkerbell, and a troll is really an ogre. So let's turn that around. There are 6-foot-tall fairies that are as mean as hell, and then there are ogres that are perhaps like Shrek, so you just can't judge the book by its cover. And that was a very simplistic way of putting it. But
no, it's true. And one of the things to think, and fairies are a huge, huge, huge category. And again, I write about them more, actually, in another book in the Encyclopedia of Witchcraft. But they're a huge category. And, when there are fairies, when people think of fairies, they tend to think of the Sheik in Ireland, but there are fairies from all over the world, and there are these spirits who have been categorized by the word fairy. And one of the things they have in common, one of the reasons they're categorized together, is that they're often associated with nature, with wild nature. And if you look at what people have done, to the ecology, to Earth, I wouldn't necessarily expect any kind of a spiritual being that has an affiliation with nature to be automatically generous and loving toward us. You kind of have to prove yourself a little bit if you want to have that kind of a relationship.
Exactly. Now, before we get into a little bit more about working with the spirits and stuff, I want to talk about thresholds and crossroads, which are places that spirits are most likely to be encountered, and maybe so this would be a good time to define those terms.
Liminal space. It is that space that is sort of both and neither at the same time. Dividers. Thresholds are literally the space between the outside and your door, inside and outside. But there are thresholds all over. The threshold to shore is the threshold between the sea and the earth. Threshold, and they're places of power. Crossroads as well. Crossroads are, and there are different kinds of crossroads, 3-way, 4-way, the occasional 5-way crossroads. And there's that point of power where this magical energy accumulates and just is a little bit more potent, a little bit more accessible, and it is and you'll find a lot of magic spells that will involve thresholds and crossroads. There are some other kinds of places like that. Traditionally, places where things meet. Energies meet, energies sort of divide, and that sort of really, you become very sensitive to it after a while if you do any kind of magical work, any sort of, spiritual work. But it's also a place where a lot of spirits like to live. A lot of djinn are threshold dwellers. They like to, and it's one of the reasons why, brides are carried over thresholds, or, in some cultures they'll advise you not to step on the threshold because they're sleeping there, and you don't want to bother them.
I know you're talking about using them in spell work and stuff, but I don't know how to put this.
I don't know. I'm always cautious about the word. Somebody asked me that earlier today. I'm always cautious about the word using, because using implies something inanimate. And I mean, a lot of people. It's a common. I don't think people. It's just how we put things.
Right.
But it's like when you use a measuring spoon. You pick up a spoon and you use it and you put it down. But spirits are alive.
Mm-hmm.
And
do people?
It's interactive. It's all For as much as there's a lot of talk of commanding, and I think that's when people talk about commanding spirits, it always makes me a little nervous because, well, if you have to, if they're so commandable, you don't really need them. Then you could do it all yourself. The fact that you need them sort of tells you something about the dynamics of that power.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you think people in general may not actively be looking for a threshold or a crossroad, and they might not even notice it, but we've all walked, in nature at some point, and all of a sudden felt a little bit different, but we didn't know why.
Yeah.
Is that like the telltale sign? Something,
sometimes,
just the atmosphere changed a little bit, or?
Yeah, although there are others, that could mean spirits in the area too.
Oh yeah.
When you're in, I like the beach. If you are in the ocean, you know how sometimes you get a little cold spot or a little warm spot? And it's really, there's not necessarily a reason for it. But when you walk around, not in the water, it's like that too. You get the cold spot, you get the warm spot. You can become very sensitive to it, and often it's because you're reacting to the power of the area. But it's a little bit of a vicious circle because the spirits like those spiritually powerful areas. So you may be really, the whole point about the crossroads, this area has the power, but the spirits come over to the power too. So where those points of power, those places of power, are also going to be places where you're very likely to meet different kinds of spirits. It's a little bit like, 42nd Street, the crossroads of the world. You meet all kinds of people. You're going to meet all kinds of spirits, too.
I like that. So how do we begin to even start working with spirits, or going back to what you said about being the spiritual matchmaker, how do we choose the ones we want to work with, and how can they assist us? I mean, what, for those that don't know?
Well, there are different ways, and the question also from that is why, why does someone want to meet them? Do you want to meet them? And for a lot of people, we want to encounter a spirit or have some sort of interaction because we have a situation that is not being resolved in any other way, and we need a miracle. We need spiritual assistance because the mundane assistance isn't working, and whether this is wanting to get pregnant when you can't, or having some sort of an emergency. And then there are other people who just love spirits, and they don't necessarily want anything. They just want to mingle in that world. I mean, the basic answer, although it's not really satisfying, but I found it to be true, is that to some extent spirits choose you. It's not who you want to choose, it's who's going to choose you. You have to find out who's willing to work with you. If you don't, it's easier if you don't want anything, because then you just look for who resonates with you, who has a beautiful story, or something in the story that you identify with, you relate to, you read their legends, and they stay with you. And then you sort of, a lot of altar building is done very casually and spontaneously. People start collecting stuff. You start collecting. You get an Athena Barbie doll, and then you get an Athena statue, and then you find yourself picking up some little owls, which owls are Athena's birds, and then people notice that you've got these owls, and so people like collectors because it's easy to give them gifts, so they start giving you more owls, and next thing you know you have built and alter without trying to.
Mm-hmm.
And if you, as I say in the book, if you build it, they come. I mean, one is, if you create their essence, if you sort of start bringing their essence, things that they like, things that they're comfortable with, things that they recognize themselves, the Orisha, an Orisha is a kind of the Yoruba spirit, is a kind of a spirit. Oshun is given, her offering is typically spring water and honey, but Oshun is her essence is also the spring water and the honey. So she recognizes herself. When you put those things out for her, she recognizes herself. She recognizes. They start putting out, the colors. Spirits who are very active, who are gregarious, and there are spirits who like to work with people. There are spirits who are very responsive. It's very likely you will, if you put in a petition, you'll see some kind of a reaction. As opposed to there are spirits who have to be kind of, they're feral, like a feral, like a feral cat. You have to coax them. You have to encourage them to come closer to you. And they may not be, they may be a little skittish. They may not be willing to work with a lot of people, but they might be willing to work with you if you're the right person.
Mm-hmm.
The spirits who are really gregarious will have accumulated a whole vocabulary that you can use to communicate with them. They have colors and they have numbers. Oshun's number is 5, and she has a medal. She has colors. She has, I bought her a candle holder at Yankee Candle. It's not a metaphysical store, but I happened to be walking by a Yankee Candle store, and I saw this little candle holder, and it essentially had Oshun written all over it. So you'll start to see them. The more reclusive ones are a little bit harder. One of the ways to know, and I use eBay as a search engine a lot while I'm working, because eBay, at least until recently, it's kind of a good arbiter of what's going on in the world currently. So when I was writing the Encyclopedia of Spirits, I would just plug their name into the search engine, because the spirits who are really active, there's a lot of people selling stuff for them. Kuan Yin, Oshun, Babalu, is identified with St. Lazarus, and you'll just find all this stuff because they're friendly, and people either will want to beckon them, will want to thank them, will want them in their home, and people will just will buy stuff. And often it'll be reasonably priced stuff, because it's stuff that, it's not something that is so expensive that it's hard to purchase or it's elitist or very limited. Versus, there are spirits who only show up in academic sources, because the people, it's not that they're not working with people, but it's at such a limited basis that if you want to create a candle for them, you're going to do it yourself in your own kitchen. You're not, there's no one selling it. There's not enough demand for it.
And, it's so funny that you mentioned eBay, because I went through a phase that I was crazy about the Hotai figurines, the Laughing Buddha.
Yeah, I love him.
And I scoured eBay, and I had at one time 20 of them, and you're right, they were reasonably inexpensive, except for my favorite one. They must have made a typo on that one, but he's a big, fat, beautiful, 1950s kind of Hotai.
Yeah.
And it said $29. Now, all of his brothers, because, they have duplicates in there, were going for $299. And I said, I've got to get it. It's a typo. We'll see what happens, but I got to get it. So I ordered it, and it was great. It was $29. I'm thinking, oh, my God, I've got this big, huge Hotai coming from Shanghai, and I was just really excited. And then they put the shipping charge on it. It was $167. But you know what? I had to have him. And so now I call him Shanghai Yu. A friend of mine said, I got to give him a name. He's Hotai, but I got to give him a name.
Yeah.
She said he comes from Shanghai, and he Shanghaied you with that shipping fee. So let's call him Shanghai Yu. So that's what we're calling him. But I mean, I've got Hotai's. I've weeded them down to just my favorites now because it's just kind of silly to have way too many.
Fortune tellers.
Yes, and he sits
at
my desk. Yeah, and I've got I think 5 of them now.
I read on many Saturdays in a store in New York City where they sell a lot of statues from Hindu and Buddhist pantheons, and I always I put Hotai on my table where I read because they've got a really nice selection of them, and he's almost always sort of supervising my readings for me. And people just sort of think, you've got the Buddha there, but
Yeah, I mean, it's just, again, it's something that just resonates and jumps out at you. And eBay at that time was the perfect place, and now it's kind of died down a little bit. There aren't so many really good ones, because I didn't want the new ones, the ones that all look like cookie-cutter ones that were made from the same mold. Well,
the stuff comes in waves, I find. You'll get like a wave of merchandising or, items for a certain spirit, and then it dies down, and then, eventually it kind of comes back, it rolls back in.
Yeah, well, my guys are safe, and they're around there. They make me smile, so what are you going to do? I have a couple of food dogs with them just to keep company. I mean, it's neat how things will resonate to you, or you will resonate to them.
Have you seen the Japanese, the seven spirits of good fortune?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because good friends there.
Yeah, I mean, I really believe in a past life I was Asian. I think that plays a part of it because it's just too familiar.
I find that once you bring one spirit in, they tend to start bringing their friends in.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, you've got all spirits in every corner.
Yeah, and the weird thing is, you would think that with the food dogs and with the Hotais that Kuan Yin would show up, and I've never had any kind of desire to get anything of Kuan Yin, and she's a wonderful one to have around,
Yeah.
So it's just kind of strange.
It has to do with what resonates for you, though. It's hard to sort of tell other people what to do with it. You have to feel it for yourself.
Yeah. You just kind of have to live it.
Mm-hmm.
I want to change subject just a little bit and get a little bit snarky and wisecracky for a second. But you mentioned in your book that Christianity demonized all spirits, just as they do witches. But as far as I can tell, all witches are human, or did they think that we were not? This is just a point I'm throwing out there.
There are people who think witches are not. I mean, there are people who think witches are not really human. It's like, bewitched. And, whoever, the creators of Bewitched didn't make that up. There are people who perceive witches as somehow as another, we're co-walkers who are not exactly the same. There are people who perceive that anybody with any kind of what would now be classified as paranormal powers are sort of, slightly different from other humans. However, there are all different kinds of classifications. But there are also spirits who were, especially in the areas that are now Germany, that were kind of reclassified as queens of witches. So they weren't. It's not like someone coming and saying, "Well, there's only God." There's God, there's Jesus, and there's no one else. They don't exist. It's acknowledging that these beings are there, but they're not worthy of worship. They're only worshipped by witches. And it's a little bit of a catch-22 here, though, because if you are worshiping them, then sort of if de facto you are a witch. Freya, in particular, is a goddess who wasn't shoved under the rug easily. Up until the 13th century, there are still, waves of worship, waves of veneration that kind of come out of the pagan closet that opens. And so we're not just talking about people sort of, little pockets under the mountain where, no one knows about them and, until they, emerge like 600 years later and say, oh yes, we're hereditary witches. We've always, been doing this. These are, historically documented. In the Inquisition would come and, say, well, she's a queen of witches, and if you worship her, you're a witch, and you know what we do to human witches.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty strong-arm technique to make someone stop worshiping a deity.
Yeah, for sure. Now,
but you have Freya and Herta and Hulda, Becta. There are a number of them.
Yeah.
Rosmerta is
who?
I always find it. Yeah, exactly. Who? Rosmerta is.
Oh, I've heard of her. Okay.
She's a Celtic goddess. She was an extremely important Celtic goddess, particularly on the continent. In Gaul and in Germany, and she really. I don't even know if I should call her a Celtic goddess. She may be a pre-Celtic. She really is a bridge between the Celtic areas and the Germanic areas. She's venerated by both, and she was, a very beloved, very popular goddess who is exactly who. She's not well known now. Even among pagan goddess worshippers, she's pretty obscure. But she would be another one who, she has a romance with Odin. So, they all.
Maybe that's right. I heard, yeah. I mean, once the Skype kind of went burble on you, and that's why I didn't hear the name. But the minute I did, I did. Why I know.
Yeah, but I mean, she is an obscure goddess. I mean, it sort of surprises me because some of the goddesses who were very, very popular, a couple millennia ago, are obscure today versus goddesses who were somewhat obscure then, who have just emerged with the passion and have this very, very broad base of devotees. Now it's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Now, what some people may not know, as with spirit guides, each spirit has a particular specialty, and we can call upon them for specific purposes. And you've got a very comprehensive appendix in the back of the book that makes them really easy to look up. Everything from Ghostbuster spirits who can corral or banish ghosts to those that deal with professions or magical knowledge or something. And one of those caught my eye, and this is just very Marla, because, it caught my eye not because it's so odd, although I do kind of go after the quirky sometimes.
Yeah, me too.
Because I was just getting my email, and I was reading the book, looked up an email, and I, like everybody else, keeps getting spam mail about Viagra. And so you've got a heading in your list of spirits that people can call upon for erectile dysfunction, like Pan or Aphrodite, Dagda, and a few others who provide the equivalent of spiritual Viagra, which is far cheaper and would probably keep spam folders all over the world a little emptier if people went that route instead of,
and healthier
pharmacies.
I mean, less side effects.
Yeah. But, it just cracked me up because I just saw that.
There are spirits for everything, every health issue you can think of. As we evolve, spirits evolve with us. So, now we have spirits for, look, St. Aphrodite has evolved into the patron of hackers, computer hackers. We have, as there are new professions, spirits evolve with us. They're living, they evolve too. And so any health issue, and something like erectile dysfunction is not modern. If you could go back, a couple thousand years ago and speak with, the people of that day about their concerns, those are the kind of things that they were worried about back then too. Erectile dysfunction, infertility, concerns about appearance. These are pretty universal human concerns. And so, before it's not like the concern came about in reaction to Viagra. We have had this, we've had this issue forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I mean, there's no reason. I mean, if people kind of accept that spirits, saints, will assist you with things like, major crises, life and death illnesses and fertility. But why not? Why not any other issue you can think of?
Even the little pesky ones, it doesn't have to be something major. Yeah, and that's a very good point. Now that we've talked about the Viagra spirits, are there any, because people will really want that information, but are there any particular spirits that you feel are best to stay away from at all costs?
I didn't put them in my book. What I would actually be concerned about, there are spirits in that book, and it's pretty explicit. There are a couple in there that are really last resort spirits or dangerous spirits, but if you read the text, it's written out pretty straightforwardly. You'll know. Depending on your situation.
And kind of also depending
there
on...
Are spirit, depending on your situation, there are spirits who maybe in general you might want to stay away from, and especially in cases of life and death of a loved one. Mm-hmm. The reality is we will go to dangerous spirits. We will do whatever we have to do to take care of situations. And so I kind of have instructions for what you do in those situations. What I would be more concerned about is spirits who are not named. And when I say that, the spirits in my book, and there are a lot of them. It's a book, it's like 800 pages or so, double columned. They have names and they have histories. Even the newer ones who have emerged, and that's the difference between spirits and spirit guides. Spirit guides are very individual and will be working with you one-on-one, and nobody else ever in the universe may know your spirit guide. But spirits, even the unfriendly ones, have a history, and they have a track record, and you kind of know what they do. Aphrodite, people don't think of her as a dangerous spirit, but she has a temper and a bit of a reputation. And if you behave badly, she can be a dangerous spirit. And she typically manifests her when she, either because, you have... People associate Aphrodite with love, so they think that, if you piss her off, you'll have a bad love life or you'll have a bad sex life. But in her earliest incarnations especially, she's very involved with animals. And she has historically, if you really anger her, will express anger through animal attack. It's a very physical thing. Mm-hmm. But that's what she does. And she has been doing this forever. Mm-hmm. So it's not a surprise. And, spirits who sort of show up, and and this is sort of the problem with the Ouija board. I get asked a lot about Ouija boards. Mm-hmm. Ouija boards are portals. There's nothing you can't do with a Ouija board that you can't also do with a mirror. So it's not, it's not the board itself. It's what the board evokes in people. And so if you are, Halloween is coming, and if you're going to sit around a Ouija board and ask for whoever is hovering to sort of show up and scare you, well, you're inviting something through a portal, and you don't know who it is. You don't know what it is. You don't know. If you have a spirit with a name and a reputation, and you address it by its name, it's a recognizable spirit. You'll know. If you'll know, it should behave in the same way that, let's say we have a family, or you have a best friend, and your best friend's name is Anne, and if you call up Anne, and I had a similar situation once where I called up someone on the phone with a fairly common name, and it was a wrong number, but there was a person with that name there, but pretty quickly I realized it wasn't the person I intended to call, because this person wasn't behaving the way the person I knew behaved. She didn't have, I asked about something and she didn't have the knowledge she should have had.
Right.
If she was that person. Spirits are very similar. It's very much like dealing with people, but magnified. It's just magnified. Mm-hmm. So if you have to be polite with people, you have to be more polite with spirits.
Yeah, well, we should always be polite to all sentient beings, but hey,
Exactly.
Sometimes that just doesn't work. When I was looking through your vast list of deities listed in the book, I was searching high and low for one that was the master of time, because 1 hour just flies by way too fast. Just as starting again. So I was going to call on it to help stretch this hour, but either I
overlooked it again,
or I couldn't find her. So I think we're going to have to give in to Father Time here and start wrapping up. But where can people find more about you and your books?
My books are available wherever fine books are sold, online, in stores. If you can't find them in stores, a lot of stores no longer stock a big selection of books. But if you ask a bookseller to get you a book, they will usually be very happy to do it for you at no extra cost. I'm online. My website is myname.com, www.judikailles, JUDIKAILLES.com, and it will take you to my Twitter and my Facebook, and I'm all over the place.
That's a good place to be, all over the place.
Yeah.
It's really important. And the other thing you were saying about the encyclopedia that isn't available here in the States,
it's available on Kindle.
Okay, all right.
I mean, in the U.S. it is available on and not on the Nook for whatever reason. I mean, I have no, the publishers I have nothing to do with any of the distribution. But for whatever reason, there's a Kindle version and not a Nook version, and you can often find secondhand versions.
Okay, and also I've found books that aren't in print here in the U.S. over at Amazon.com UK.
Yeah.
So that's also,
and
all you have to do. And Canada, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Just figure
and
out.
actually, there's Book Depository.
Mm-hmm.
Book Depository will ship books worldwide, typically with no shipping charge, which is a really nice thing.
Really? Okay, I just wrote that one down.
Yeah,
that's kind of amazing. But definitely, I mean, we just scratched the surface here, just like we did with the Saints book. We're going to have to actually get a Reverend Witch show together for 2 hours with Tim and I, so we can really kind of get into the meat of some of this stuff, because I've got questions that we don't even have time to ask, and I still want to know the answers to. So we're going to have to do that. But thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you, Marla.
It really. It's a pleasure having you on. It's a bigger pleasure reading your books. They make me smile. And since I'm a crotchety old hag, that doesn't happen too often. So you're just doing me a favor here, and it's always a good thing. And as always, I want to thank everybody for listening in as well. And mind you, please join Reverend Tim Shaw and I next week for our live annual Halloween seance, which begins at 8 o'clock Eastern. I'm excited, and I hope you will be too, because you never know who Tim's going to be channeling in this year or what kind of personal experiences you might have. So don't forget, next week. And until then, everybody, blessed be, and merry meet again. Good night.
This has been another edition of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Be sure to tune in next week at the same time for another great guest and more cauldron stirring. Any rebroadcast or use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2012.
You have been listening to the Para X Radio Network.